It's time to be woke. Take off your shades. It helps see through the smoke. Cause the wicked hide behind the cloak. And if you stay in the mist, you gon' be soaked. So listen up, cause this hair of the dog. What's real, what ain't? Is this the fog or smog? Cause there's a difference when you breathe it in. So don't let the corporate media take you for a spin. This that morning show, they put you in the know. So I hope that you ready, cause all we do is go, go, go. Yeah, come get your info, you gon' be like, whoa. Hair of the dog, we bout that, ayy. We in the zone, we out here, yeah. Speeding the facts.
Hi, welcome back. That was fun. My apologies, everyone. Not sure what happened. I've never seen the audio fail on the Zoom OBS platforms working together before, but I guess we can call that a ghost in the machine. Took a laptop reset, but anyways, regardless, we're back. I guess I'll start again. Thank you very much for joining us today. This is Hair of the Dog. I'm Andy Kennedy. It is Friday, and I had this really wonderful little intro planned, but clearly we're really late now, so we're not going to fucking do it. So we're going to get right into it today because we've got some stuff to talk about. So I'm going to first of all introduce my lovely and talented co-host, Ms. Carrie Barber. Good morning, Carrie.
Hey, good morning, Andy. It's Friday. Anything can happen, and we really appreciate everybody rejoining us on this new stream. So thank you for your patience this morning. And real quick, I want to give a shout out. I have new glasses. So shout out to Zenni Optical, the CENNI. No, I haven't been paid. No, this is not an endorsement of their product. I'm just saying, for those of you out there who, like me, had to pay $300 for a pair of glasses, I got 2 pairs for $60 through Zenni Optical. So for those of us who don't have that kind of cash for the big swaggy glasses, and these are transition lenses, so I'm super stoked about these. Yeah, if you have a resource that everyone else can participate in, drop it in the chat. So Zenni happens to be one of my favorites. Who do you use? Because yeah, right now we cannot afford $100, let alone $300 for a new pair of glasses. So yeah, thank you, Zenni. So along those lines,
oh, sorry, Gary. I just wanted to mention. I said that's that all goes part and parcel with what we talk about when we're talking about mutual aid, right? And you live in a society that doesn't give a shit about you. We have to look out for one another. And if somebody finds a deal online and share it, that helps a lot of people, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Optimism, good morning. Optimism says, yep, I use them too. And they're really wildly popular. For those of you who don't know, when you went to your optometrist or ophthalmologist or whatever else, all those glasses that you were purchasing, the frames and everything else, came through one company, Luxottica. They have a really, really big office in Cincinnati, Ohio. So they were all coming from the same place, and you were just, being price gouged. So thankfully, there were other competition entities coming into play. Zenni is just one of them, where we could actually get frames and glasses and everything that we needed. So I know Zenni has bifocals and, like I said, the transitions, and I got blue blockers because I'm now in the desert, and I need to preserve the 9% of vision that I have left. So yeah, please drop your resources in the chat. If it's not Zenni, it's something else. Let other people know, because millions of people, particularly in this country where we don't have access to healthcare, wear glasses, contacts, things like that. So yeah, help each other out. So Aspen Fallen, good morning. And for everyone else who's joining us this morning, good morning. Welcome to Friday. In the chat, I have put all of our links, some of the things that we're going to talk about today. Feel free to add your own. Please make sure that the resources that you put in the chat are verified, and we don't want to go batshit crazy tinfoil. So let's stick to facts and logic. And the reason I put the links in there is I want you to follow along and do appreciate a good, healthy challenge to some of the things that we say and some of the information we present. This is why we're upfront and transparent with all of it. So it's a family conversation. Feel free to drop in the chat, talk to each other, talk to us. We do see these things and we want you to participate because these are things that we all need to know. So Aspen says, reading the video description reminds me how native reservations are that way too. Even though they're sovereign, the federal government owns them 100%, right? And that is Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution, Aspen. So if you're not familiar out there in video land with Article 6 of the U.S. Constitution and you're all about the U.S. Constitution, please read Article 6. We're supposed to honor our agreements and have integrity as a nation. Aspen, you're right. We haven't always done. So absolutely. So the other thing that I did put in the chat, and Andy and I have covered this quite a bit, as well as some of our colleagues on Fred Hampton Leftist, about the eviction crisis. And one of the stories that we brought to you, this is kind of the cause and effect, and this comes from economics. I'm going to frame this in an economic discussion, right? So if this is news to you, I want you to really understand this cause and effect. States, as part of our union here, cannot create their own money. They only get money through two sources. One is taxation or in fees, which is another way of saying taxes. The other is from the federal government. Every state cannot create their own currency. That only comes from the federal government. So for decades, when people have been talking about smaller government drowning in a bathtub, what they were saying is they wanted the federal funds to stop flowing to the states. So, okay, that has largely happened in many respects. So what is the cause and effect of having that happen? You have states with fewer, tighter budgets, which means Meals on Wheels, pre-K education, all of these social services had to be cut at a state level because they just couldn't afford them. And states had to find creative new ways of earning money, which means they were taxing you. And these are a lot of hidden taxes. So rather than the taxes up front, these were behind the scenes, right? And you could make the case that, like in Florida, where they have nothing but toll roads and they're taxing the people who use those roads. Sure, okay, but the story that we're bringing to you about evictions and this massive transfer of wealth is happening to everybody. And if you are a homeowner, I really need you to pay attention because this is happening where you live too. So one of the prior stories we talked about was some of our retirees, particularly in Florida and in Arizona and things like this, they were using their retirement savings to buy a mobile home in a mobile home park. And what was happening to them was when you put your mobile home in a mobile home park or you buy into a mobile home park, you own that mobile home, but you don't own the land that it sits on. And what was happening and is happening is the property owners who own that park were not necessarily keeping up with things. So what was happening is code enforcement was coming in and shutting down the parks, or if there was a health hazard, they were using the code to declare that property was unsafe. So if you were a retired homeowner on a limited income and now you can no longer live in your mobile home and you can't sell it, what do? You're screwed. You have to walk away from it. You have to bargain with your property owner. And in many cases, in stories we brought to you, property owners didn't give a shit. So what was happening is when that house was condemned, the person had to leave because of code. And then the property owners were going in, buying up that house, fixing everything up, and even selling it. So this is a transfer of wealth. And it was happening to the older generations. It's also happening to people in apartments. All of these things are going on. Here's another aspect of it. And this story kind of fell in my lap. So those of you who missed us on Wednesday,
literally,
guess what I was dealing with? Right. So, yeah. Yeah, so Aspen, this is making me want to watch that movie Nomadland. Yeah, absolutely. So here's what happened. I am in the middle of the desert in New Mexico, and like most people, I really struggled to find housing during the pandemic. And I have two big dogs. I don't have little dogs. I have two big dogs. So the only place that we could find, there are only two places in the city that will accept two big dogs, and we lived in both of them. One was tiny, it was 300 square foot, and then we moved to another one that said that they were dog friendly. Well, while we were there, we had two of our vehicles broken into, and our dogs were harassed and threatened and had basically it was assault. Somebody threw something at them. It was just not a safe environment for my dogs. So what we decided to do is we scraped up some of our retirement, and land here is very, very cheap, very cheap. So we thought, let's buy some land and we'll just move onto our own property that we own. And that's a safer place for the dogs. They have more room to run around. And we are in the process of building a house. Now, the way that we're doing it is a little unconventional, and because we're doing most of the work ourselves. So it's a lot cheaper than what most people have to face. Here's what happened. Um, this story kind of fell in my lap because I got hit with a COVID violation. Even though we had went through the process of getting a conditional use permit, paid the fees, went through everything, went through the hearing, we still got hit with a code violation. And I don't understand why, because if anybody's watched the show and you've seen me enough, I'm going to follow the law exactly. Absolutely. We will not break the law. We will do everything that we have to do because that's just who we are. So I was a little curious. So I got to spend 2.5 hours at the county code office. And here's what I have learned. Number one, the city planners, the code planners, the people that help you with getting permits and things like that, they are separate from code enforcement. So the planners are there to help you walk you through the process and figure out how you need to navigate what you need to apply for. Enforcement, so the code cops, and it's a very different experience. So 2.5 hours later, I'm not going to go into all of the detail, but one of the things that was said to me in how do I describe it? In a very hostile, aggressive tone was, we allow you to live there. And that phrase keeps going through my head. We allow you to live there. So here I am, somebody who owns land, legally purchased it. I pay taxes on this land. I got a permit and paid the fee for the permit to live on this land. And it was a mental reset for me about what property owners' rights are and how code enforcement views property owners' rights. So this story kind of fell in my lap, and so here's some of just a fraction of the information that I have found already. And this is all I'm going to say about my particular case, because for those of you who've ever been on this side of things, I need to build my house and I need to play ball. And these people right now are holding my permit hostage. They have literally said they are holding my building permit hostage. So that's all I'm going to say about my particular case. But I do want to explore what's happening all across the country. And Andy, I got a story from Canada where this is happening there too. So
Oh, no kidding.
let's set this up. Yeah. So here we have a housing crisis where it's just not affordable. People are being taxed out of their homes. You cannot afford rents. We're seeing even landlords right now double and tripling the rents on renters. So what do? Our incomes have been stagnated purposely stagnated for decades. So now we just can't keep up with the cost of a basic apartment. So some people are finding themselves unhoused. And we saw kind of this this trend with Generation Z and all of these folks moving into a van and just, being unhoused and making a go of it. So here's the ugly side of what happens to the unhoused. Then we had the pandemic, and you had a bunch of people like us who scraped together what you had to buy a recreational vehicle or a van or a camper, so that you would still have shelter but
Something
not
with a
necessarily
roof.
have a traditional home. Yes, a roof. So in my particular situation, the RV that I live in is, what is it, 17 years old. This is what we could afford, a 17-year-old RV, and she's lovely, but it's not ideal. So in the code world, if this particular vehicle that is 17 years old didn't have an axle and didn't have tires, and I dropped it on a concrete pad, it's considered a mobile home, and it's totally fine so long as I get the permits for it. But because I have axles and wheels, now there's a problem. And this is going on all across the country. So what I personally heard and what I'm seeing from other people and talking to other people is code enforcement is coming in and saying, well, you pose a health risk. You pose a health risk. So what they're doing is saying that, well, your wastewater, like, you don't have septic on a private property typically. Mine is actually being installed today, but most people don't have septic, so you have to haul your, what they call black water. Andy, back me up. You've been in an RV camping longer than I have. This is my first
Just
experience.
picture Christmas vacation and what's his name standing there with the sewer pipe. Shitter's full.
Well, and yeah, we joke about that every time. So we haul ours to an approved place. It happens to be like a truck stop, pay the fee and dispose of it. That's what you have to do for code, right? And I can prove it every week. I've got the fees and I've got receipts and everything else. So what they have said is, well, you pose a health risk, therefore we're going to hit you with code violation. Here's the kicker. They don't ask how you dispose of your wastewater. They don't ask for receipts. They don't ask for proof. They make the assumption because they can. And optimism says, yeah, code enforcement is legalized theft. An unregistered car in my driveway in Nashville wound up costing me $700 and the loss of the car because I did not have a garage. Wow. And this is exactly it. It's so, if you read over the code, here's the discrepancy. I've got the code memorized. I had to memorize the code. I've got the building code and everything else. I'm pretty good at citing the chapter and verse for where the code falls. But that's not necessarily the problem. The code itself is meant to keep you from doing stupid, from setting yourself on fire, killing yourself, or threatening your neighbors. I get that. It's the interpretation that has become a little bit of the problem across the United States. So yeah, if you have a neighbor who's a hoarder, who's maybe causing an issue, this is where code enforcement really helps you as a community. This is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is property owners' rights and the way that the code is being enforced. Two entirely different things. So one of the first things that I posted in the chat, which I thought was interesting, this is Seattle, Washington. Seattle has kind of blown up quite a bit over the last 2 years. But Seattle, a few years ago, I think this article is from 2017, they had a bunch of the unhoused folks who were in RVs and campers and things like this in vacant lots. And the municipal officers in Seattle didn't like it. And what I thought was pretty interesting is they were saying, we would rather these people be out of their campers and RVs and in tents, because if they choose to stay in an RV and a camper that's too comfortable for them, and they will never enter into our social services for shelters, community shelters where you're packed in like sardines. They're too comfortable in their camper. and they won't go into a shelter and enter into the systems. We would rather them be in tents. So fast forward to 2021, we now know that Seattle has been taking the tent cities, wiping them out, throwing away the tents, getting rid of all the personal property of all of these unhoused persons. And so here again is cause and effect. Seattle municipal code was enforced to prevent these people from exercising their right to their property in campers and RVs and pushing them into tents. And then they could take those tents, destroy the tents and all the personal property and evict those people. Because when you're in a place of perceived privilege, if you have a house, you don't want to see that stuff. You don't want to see a tent. You don't want to feel uncomfortable in your person because those people exist. How dare they exist? So we are totally okay with them being wiped out. And here in Albuquerque, there was a story about a park, a public park, that is daily being cleared multiple times by police officers because they don't want to see people in the park. Let me repeat that. There is a public park where police officers are going and sweeping the park because they don't want to see people in the park. Okay. It blows my mind. And this is
So you can't really call it public then, can you?
No, you cannot. You cannot. So it's NIMBYism at its finest. But here's the thing, right? It goes back to that phrase of first they came for this group and I said nothing. Then they came for this group and I said nothing. And then they came for me. So this is for NIMBYism. If you're not paying attention and you're sitting in a house and you're hearing all of this going, well, you should just, you're missing the point. You're absolutely missing the point, because when you have homeowners who are being evicted through eminent domain, when you have homeowners who are being taxed out of their houses, and then you have people living in apartments who are being priced out of their apartments, and then you have this pandemic going on where people are like, okay, I can't afford any of that, but I can afford this little box on wheels, and I'm going to go live in that. And now those things are happening to make sure that they not only cannot have that vehicle, they cannot own property, they cannot do any of these things to protect their own families. Where did these people go? Uh, Optimism, it was in what was the local news? KRO TV. It was, there's a community center attached to this park, a homeless community center. And what was happening is some of the residents who were staying at the community center happened to want to enjoy the green space, and apparently that's not allowed. So if you don't have a house, you are not allowed to participate in parks. So if you do a quick Google search on Albuquerque and unhoused and parks, it'll come right up. So here's what I want you to understand, because our situation is a little bit different than most people. And this is where, as I'm going through this, yeah, Aspen, okay, and this is my overarching point. Local elections impact local issues. That is hugely important, because as I'm looking across the United States at code enforcement, and these committees that are set up, what I have found is, just like with our issues with local policing, a lot of municipalities are setting up citizen committees, just regular folks who live in the area, to kind of arbitrate some of these disputes. It's not necessarily what I found on a county by county level across the United States when it comes to code enforcement. What is actually happening is there is a committee meant to arbitrate disputes between property owners and code enforcement. But the people who are appointed to that committee happen to work in code enforcement and are often the employees who directly report to the code enforcement officer, who is part of the arbitration process. So think about that for a second. If you're appointed to that committee and your boss brings a case where they said X and the property owner says Y, now your job may be on the line. Retaliation does happen. So is that something that we desire and think is a good thing? And this is where local elections really matter in that particular case. You can get that change and make that a citizen committee and do your civic duty and get on that committee. You can go to your county board and talk to your county board members. And if they won't listen to you, guess what? You can run for county board. So I, I was on the phone quite a bit talking to my state representative, and I have a friend in the governor's office, and all of these things, really bringing this issue to light and figuring out, okay, where do I go from here as a property owner, and what's happening around me with my neighbors? Because in my particular conversation with this gentleman in code enforcement, he wasn't talking about me. He spent the first 45 minutes talking about my neighbors and how it was a problem for him and his office. And in my head, I'm thinking about, you're talking about 100,000 families, my neighbors, in this derogatory way. And I'm concerned. I'm really concerned because I got to tell you, I have met more of my neighbors and more people pitching in to help. Like we helped my husband, not we, the royal we, my husband helped haul hay for a neighbor, you know, tossing hay bales because they needed it. And another neighbor walk over and say, hey, you guys okay? Do you need some water? What's going on? I have met more of my neighbors here, and it is not an affluent community. These are very humble people. And here I got to listen to 45 minutes of somebody disparaging them. And that didn't sit well with me. So I want to make this very clear about this situation that's going on. So Andy, if you wouldn't mind that graphic that I put together. So this kind of illustrates for you the economic difference in my situation as opposed to some of my neighbors. Now let's remember, global pandemic. We have almost 700,000 people who have died. Those who have recovered, the 35 million, many of them, and we're seeing these articles now, have been saddled with medical bills amounting to $800,000 or more. We have people who are called long haulers who have chronic issues, 6 months or more. So all of this is in the backdrop of what's happening and why people may have chosen to go unhoused and live in an RV or a camper, particularly if they own land, go out to their own property and decide, well, I'm going to hold out here and maybe save some money, right? The story that I posted about the family in Georgia was one such family. They had scraped up enough money to buy a camper to go and live and try to live sustainably. They had chickens and a few other things and their children, and moved out to their land to try and ride this out because they were destitute, had nothing else. And code enforcement actually hit them with a violation and kicked them off their land. So there's two parts to this. So in this piece of it, this is how most areas, and like I said, all but 5 states require this line of expenditure from a property owner in order to be code compliant. So I want you to see this. The cost of a used RV, if you buy a spectacularly crappy RV, you're going to pay about $3,000. In my case, it's a 17-year-old RV, and we were at the upper end of that price point, right? So maybe you get a deal, maybe someone gifts you one, something like that, but this is typical nationwide of what you're going to spend. And then the conditional use permit, I had to pay $75, fill out the form, explain what we intended to do, that we intended to build a house, and that we have a project going on. And then I had to wait for 30 days. So during that 30-day period, we were still renting the place, and my dogs were being harassed and assaulted and all of this sort of thing. Most people move out to their property and wait for the hearing. And that's often how they're going to get a code violation. So after you wait that 30 days or whatever it is in your county, you have the hearing. We got approved for a conditional use to live in the RV on our property. So I had to pay for that privilege. And then, you know, as I was told, we allow you to live on your property. Now, the next phase of it is, there's a time limit here. everybody has a time limit. And in your case, it may be a little bit different, but we went for the maximum 2 years because we are self-building our house. In some cases, it's a lot shorter. So you can only live there for a short amount of time. But then while I was there yesterday, I got to write this check for $1,998. It's $2,000 to get a building permit. A building permit that has nothing, no bricks, no mortar, no nothing. I had to hand them a check for $2,000. And then I was told that the building permit that I just paid for is going to be held hostage until I am in conformity with what they want. So then there are other fees that come up with the building permit. So it's not just the building permit. I am not done. I have other fees, other impact studies and things like that that I get to pay for. And then to build a home. Now, like I said before, and if you watched our previous episodes, what we are doing is vastly different from what most people actually do. If you are trying to build a home, even if it's a manufactured home or a mobile home or something like that, you're going to pay upwards of $100,000, all the way up to $300,000, depending on your area, just to build a home. So when you look at the cost of everything that is required to be in conformity with code to live on your own property,
Good point.
Right? So in my area, and I know this is happening in other areas, I live on the side of a mountain. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And I am reading through stories where developers had wanted to come in and build luxury condos, and they wanted to build golf courses during a mega drought. And homeowners got together and property owners got together and fought them. So who is this for? It is meant to, in my opinion, price out the average person, price out the average homeowner, price out the average community, and reserve that property for a large developer, right? So why do I say that? Well, here's what happens in code enforcement all across the country. If I, in my particular case, do not resolve this code violation, then what happens is you can be assessed a fine, and look up your own code. You can be assessed a fine daily, and it's not negligible. In my case, I am looking at $200 to $300 per day that I am out of conformity with what they want me to do. $200 to $300 per day. What? And like, the example here with the car, it's a $700 fine plus loss of use of that property, right? So here, I am looking at this huge amount if I don't get in conformity as quickly as I possibly can. So what happens if I can't pay it? Well, there's a couple things, and it depends on your municipality. In this case, they could go to courts and they could try to foreclose on my property. And what happens in foreclosure? I lose ownership rights, and the county then takes possession of my property
And all your equity.
and my equity, and they can resell it at auction. So once again, I want to express to people, if you're sitting in a house and you're going, well, that's them, this same code is being used against homeowners. And why do I say that? Well, my house is code compliant. Here's one of the loopholes. And I tell you, I heard this phrase yesterday when they were talking about 100,000 of my neighbors living in the mountains here. They used the phrase of talking about the tranquility, the aesthetic. It's unpleasing. That's an arbitrary way of describing low income, middle income property values. They were saying, and they were allowed to say, and you'll see this in the article for Georgia, that when all else fails, all of these other arguments fail, they can turn to something called aesthetics, still cite you in a code violation. So if you live in a house and somebody decides, I don't like it, I don't like it, I don't like the way it looks, I am going to hit you with a code violation about the aesthetics of your home. And guess what? You fall into the same loophole, right? So we have gone from code, which is good, the code that is developed to make sure that we don't die, kill ourselves, or in my case, set the entire mountain on fire, to an arbitrary decision about aesthetics. And as I was reading these other articles and doing research and talking to legal teams about their defense of these particular cases, aesthetics kept coming up, because how do you defend against aesthetics, right? So you have somebody who's building an artistic rendering of a house, or I live in New Mexico, they have earthship homes here all the time with bottle walls and things like that. That's an arbitrary measure of aesthetic. How you defend against it. Danny gave us a $5 super chat. So thank you, Danny. Danny says,
thank you very much, Danny.
Yeah. He says billionaire CEOs go through way less of a hassle in order to pollute the local water sources with toxic chemicals. Yeah, exactly.
We do a lot more than that.
In my mind, and for those of you who have missed prior episodes, what we had intended to do was a community space with sustainable farming, and because obviously I don't need all this land for just us. It's nice, but we intended to use it to provide food to 4 different food pantries in my area. And in the area where I live, there is no community center of any kind. So we wanted to open this up so that neighbors can meet other neighbors, and we have that kind of barter system, or just the close-knit community that we want to live in. But here, I am being told that I am being allowed to live here humble, and I better toe the line, right? So it was a sobering moment for me, and definitely not a fight I wanted to have. But this is not just about me, and I want you to understand that this is happening everywhere, absolutely everywhere. And one of the examples, I don't want to end on a sour note here. One of the examples I did want to bring
Too
forward
late.
here, like I talked about. When they talked about health and human services violations and all of these sort of things, it occurred to me never once did they ask me how we were handling it. Never once did they ask for proof, and never once have they asked my neighbors for proof either. So they don't really care about that. But the example that I want to bring forward of a group that did look at root cause and did solve it equitably, Oakland, California. And that was the article that I posted here. So Oakland has a number of vacant lots, either houses that were torn down or whatnot. And those property owners are being pushed to develop it. Like, how can you if you can't afford it, right? So those vacant lots are sitting there. And then on the other side, you have these unhoused people, untraditional housed people who live in RVs and things like that. Well, we don't necessarily want them in a vacant lot. Let's put them together. And that's how they solve the problem. So now you have somebody who's living in an RV who could partner with somebody who owns a piece of property that's not developed, get them together, and guess what? If that community area where the vacant lot exists, they get access to electric and water and sewer. And hey, that solves the health and human services issue, right? And so they've also allowed those people who have the property, you can charge that person rent, you can not, it's up to you. But if you do this, we're going to give you a tax incentive to help abate the taxes that you have to pay on that vacant lot. So here's an area and an example that got it right. They went and looked at what is the root cause? How do we solve this problem? And how do we do it in a humane community way? So kudos to Oakland, who during the pandemic addressed the issue and gave us an example that we can use everywhere in our local community. So that's one of the things I want to present to you, that my experience was They didn't care about root cause because they never asked it, but Oakland did. So kudos to Oakland. So I want to get to some of these comments, and Andy, feel free to weigh in. But yeah, so Grow a House Socialist, you're new here, so thank you for weighing in. I would imagine cost of repairs sometimes being rough, but having an RV does sound fun if you can't afford it. I usually hop on cargo trains, a bit cheaper. Well, okay, so some of us are disabled, and I can barely walk down steps.
Yes, Carrie's hopping days are somewhat behind her. No offense, Carrie.
Over. Yeah, no, it's the truth. So Whipple Dingle Weedle Puffin, good morning. It says, the living in the RV part was delightful, actually. The problem with repairs, not even problems, but the police harassment to move along. Yeah, so yeah, you get that. And so this is kind of the boondocking community and the RV life, and all of these things are coming into the space of housing insecurity. So where do you go, right? So you can't live in a house, can't live in an apartment, can't live in an RV, can't live in a tent. Where do you go? So this is kind of where it's all coming to a head here. So yeah. So Rasta Mike says, I'm hoping to convert a very common van into a stealth camper and have automobile repair experience. You know what? And a lot of people, Rasta, are doing that. And you've got businesses, one I even hate to mention, the Wally World one will allow you to park in their parking space. So if you need to, right? So here's the rub in my situation. I have to move the camper. And here in New Mexico, if you haven't heard of this, we have Balloon Fest right now. This is an international hot air balloon festival. So people from all around the world are in my area right now to experience this festival. So I can't move this camper to a campground. I can't move it to a KOA, whatever. I can't move it. There's nothing. There's nothing available. But boy, I better be code compliant here real quick on my property. So, ouch. Yeah. Let's see. Whipple Dingle. Whipple Dingle had a 1975 Chevy Sports Coach, 30-footer. Holy cow, that's luxury, 30 foot. It was so retro and funky. Wood panel interior, avocado counters, pre-smog fuel system and exhaust, and it was an eye catcher, no kidding. Well, simply with the avocado counters. Yeah, absolutely. So, and
I bet you had a gold colored toilet too.
Wow. Yeah. I don't think they
remember those
gold.
70s. Remember those 70s colored, the avocado and the gold and the.
We are all dating ourselves right now.
Yeah.
So it's funny. So Love Solidarity says, because barter dollars, the fair market value of goods and services you receive, are taxed as if they're cash. You can owe income tax, self-employment tax, employment tax. True, but if I am hauling hay and helping someone stack it in their barn for winter, how do you tax that? You can't. You can't. So, and this is kind of the barter that we're talking about, right? Like I have a very nice gentleman who actually is getting his 501c3 for his animal sanctuary, and on the side he hauls water. So he brings his water truck to me. I pay him for the water. So we're working on a barter system because that guy needs a website, and I know how to do websites. So this is what I'm talking about, community, right? So the lady who lives down the street from me, she has experience in writing grants and working through all of those programs. So she's now working with a guy who delivers water for me. And, I get to work with her on some other different projects. So this is what I mean about building that sense of community. So it's not necessarily about taxing time value. So yeah. But I don't want to get too far off track, right? So Andy, this is, again, let's step back a little bit. This is the cause and effect of economics. And I've been having these conversations because I got to tell you, when I started asking questions, some the players looking around the woodwork going, yeah, we're 100% with you on this. And we don't like the situation. We're behind you. So how did we get in this situation on state and federal? So,
Well,
Andy, what are your thoughts?
Well, oh, Carrie, where to begin? Oh my goodness, I'm trying to organize my thoughts here, but it's an hour show. I mean, this is why I haven't weighed in till now, but there's just so much going on. Like, one thing I do want to touch on quickly, in terms in general of what we understand as home ownership or property ownership, right? If you think about what that actually is, it's in terms of buying property, quote unquote, owning land, right? You think of it in terms of it's a contractual relationship, right? Between yourself and pretty much everybody else in the world, right? Like this contract that is a legal binding contract that says what you have rights to as pertaining to this particular parcel of land, as opposed to everybody else's right to that particular part of land, right? So, and that's a contractually binding thing, right? That ultimately, if you want to stand up for your own rights, you either have to, go to the authority to have your rights, stood up for that, or you have to take somebody to court, right? So this is the relationship that we have. And because that's a contract, then you have entities like the county office, the zoning office, or the inspector's office, or whoever, that can challenge that contract based on their own set of rules and regulations, right? And every single county is different based on their own needs and wants, right? So I think a lot of this that you've gone through, that you've seen, is, like we were talking about, a making up of the shortfall of tax revenue on the state and municipal levels because of the state's race to the bottom, for lack of a better term, cutting taxes to people, giving large corporations huge tax breaks, and them having to make up that money somehow. And so what do? We have all these arbitrary administration fees or fines that we apply on the homeowners for no reason. And I think that when you think in those terms, 9 out of 10 residents in those areas will not challenge that, right? Because they see that authority as absolute. When in fact, a lot of times, like Carrie was saying, well, you're saying this, but that's not actually the reality, right? That you're just trying to pull a fast whistle on me. You're trying to get me. You're just trying to squeeze more, water from a stone. When in fact, that's, if you do your due diligence, know your rights as a homeowner or a landowner, right? And stand up for yourself. And so I think that these are very important things to understand. The other part of all of this is that we're currently still going through the remnants or the blowback effect of the great financial crisis in 08, 09, right? And I'll shamelessly plug the other projects that I'm working on currently right now, this series, The New Untouchables, where we're working very closely with the creators, the producers of the docuseries The Con, which is actually come out on the 21st on Amazon and another of other platforms like Xbox and those places. It's a 5-point docuseries. If you haven't seen it, see it. It is very revealing, and there's no way to describe it here with the little bit of time we have left. But my point is that this entire financial crisis was perpetrated by complete fraud and corruption, in the housing and mortgage industry in order to steal people's equity in their homes and then evict them for fraudulent reasons, right? And then taking these false or fraudulent mortgages, bundling up as mortgage-backed securities, and selling them to unknowing investors and making money on top of that, and then evicting the people out of their properties, and then taking the properties and selling them, right? So we're seeing this huge, the world's largest corruption case in history that's perpetrating in front of our eyes still to this day. And people are being tossed out of their homes, even pre-pandemic, right? And now we're seeing this renters and mortgage moratorium, which is eventually going to come to an end. And it doesn't save anybody money. It's just pushed that problem down the road. And now we see all of these people that haven't been able to pay it because of the pandemic that are now going to be thrown out of their homes in this vast stealing of land and homes by these huge corporations like BlackRock in order to bulldoze communities away and put up huge luxury condos or whatever and just make more money off the American people. So we're at a crossroads right now in our society. And the more people that we can get to wake up to these realities, the better chance we have of surviving this, because this is going to end up in so much horrible homelessness and poverty and destruction and death that we've never seen the like of. And it scares the crap out of me. When you start to learn the truth about what's happening, it should scare the crap out of anybody. Like we saw.
I just want to jump in real quick because Layla posted a link that I really want to call attention to. And the way that the chat works, some people are not seeing it, is canceltherents.org. Cancel the rents with an S at the end. .org, and she also mentions an organizing event that's coming up for Tennessee to push back on the evictions that are happening there. So thank you, Layla, for that one. And I'm sorry for interrupting. Aspen Collin, love you, thank you. Aspen Collin gave us a super chat and says, thank you for always highlighting these things. No one else is talking about it, but everyone sees. Keep up the fight. And yeah, that's exactly why we're here. Kevin Toohey paid thousands of dollars to live in empty lots with no service. We were evicted from empty lots twice because we never developed it. And that's exactly what we're talking about. In order to be code compliant, you have to commit to spending thousands of dollars. So in my situation, just to give an example, I have 3 5-acre lots. And I have a permit for the one that I'm on right now. In order to be code compliant, here's the problem, right? So you can have an RV on a property so long as you have a dwelling, a certified dwelling. So the other little RV that I have, and it's tiny, that is not code compliant unless I put it next to a dwelling. So what we're looking at doing is I need to get another conditional use permit for that RV, spend $75 and wait and see if they approve it at the hearing and allow me to put my property on my property. And then we're looking at a tiny house, which still means I need to put in the expense of a permit, build this tiny house, get the excavation, put in a concrete pad, put this tiny house down, which is, we're looking at something pretty small. Once I have this tiny house, then I can put the RV next to it and everybody's happy. Does that make any damn sense? No. Logically, it doesn't make any sense. But what have I done in the process of becoming code compliant? I have spent a buttload of money and given it to the county in order to get permission to put my property on my property. Everybody got that? That's how it works. And if you're not doing that and you're trying to live on your property, or as Kevin said, trying to just occupy a space, you're out of code compliance. And sheriff could show up today, right now, and evict us off our property. So that's the situation that I'm in right now. And I'm just one of hundreds of thousands of people all across this country who are facing the exact same situation. So I just wanted to clarify that point. I apologize, Andy, because you were winding up on an epic
No, that's okay.
Rant.
Somebody had to pull me back down, and like I said, it's impossible to talk about all of this in an hour show, and I'd appreciate, Care, if we could just dedicate some time to this, because it's so important right now. It's so prescient, and we need to let our viewers know and the public in general that this is happening, because it's going to be the demise of society, right? It's that the end stage capitalism that we're in, that is completely unregulated now, that the transfer of wealth is almost complete from the bottom 99.9% to the top 0.1% of society. And it's going to end in either bloodshed or just people dying of the elements as our climate changes, and the floods and the heat waves and the cold and winter end up killing people from exposure, right? It's a very scary moment in our history. And if we don't wake up to the realities of it, then I really fear for all of us, because it's a very scary time, right? I just think back to just briefly, just to touch on what I was talking about earlier. I was going to make the point that, within the elitist centrist democratic circles, that they still tout Barack Obama as this absolutely amazing president who never caused any problems, or and I just, if you recall, right after the 08-09 great financial crisis, he came in with such a which seemed like a breath of fresh air, right? That we were actually finally going to get a president of the United States that was going to do something about this, right? That was going to make some actual changes for the good of the people. And I remember very distinctly him saying that although what the banks did was unethical, it wasn't illegal. And that very well could have been one of the very biggest lies that a president has ever told, right? It was highly illegal. It was absolutely 100% corrupt, fraudulent, and illegal. And they let them off the hook. Not a single banker went to jail. Their corporations paid their fines. They're still doing the same thing. These people didn't even lose their jobs, right? They're still running these scams at the highest levels. And the governments are allowing this. And it's going to end in people losing their homes, and unfortunately, horrifically losing their lives. And that's the scariest thing of all.
Yeah, if you needed no other proof during the global pandemic where so many people are suffering and dying, you don't have healthcare? You don't have access to healthcare? Really? Really? This is our response, where we bail. I think I almost lost my mic. But yeah, it's just these bailouts to corporations and banks while the people themselves suffer is just unconscionable. And I don't care where you follow the spectrum, left, right, whatever, you cannot, in good conscience, look at this as not only moral, but fiscally responsible. So So yeah, and that's yeah, Andy, we do need to have a bigger conversation than that, and I can see it happening in the chat, and we need to go into a lot of this a little bit more. But we are out of time today, and I so appreciate Layla and everyone else who put in these references in the chat to more activities going on at your local level, resources for others to delve into, and just sharing your own stories about what's going on and what you particularly experienced, Kevin, and everyone else. Thank you, because it matters. It matters when we start having these conversations with each other and talking about, yeah, that happened to me. That happened to me. That's how we got marriage equality. People started to recognize, oh, wait, that's a family member that's being affected. We need to talk to each other. We need to come together. And this is where that solidarity really comes in. So I very much appreciate everyone in the chat and your participation in this. It's always about this group participation. So thank you for tuning in this morning. And we are definitely going to be back with a whole lot more on this and other topics. So thank you. That's it for me on this Friday. See you on Monday morning. Andy, final thoughts? Take us out.
Yes. By the way, that is not Carrie. That's a cup of coffee. I'm not sure what happened to Carrie's camera, but I got you, Carrie. I'll take it from here. Once again, thank you to everybody that has participated in this stream today. We so much appreciate you. We can't do what we're doing without you. I just love reading the chat as it scrolls by. Clearly, our audience is among the most informed and intelligent audiences out there, and that's not us. That's you, and that. So kudos to you. We so much appreciate you being here, and again, thank you so much for the super chats. That's appreciated as well. Fred Hampton left us. If you're not a member of and you haven't subbed to our YouTube channel, please do follow us on Twitter and watch us on Twitch and Rockfin. It's very important because we have to rely on each other because the algorithms won't help us. Let's just say the corporate owned platforms that we have to use aren't our friends, and we rely on you to like and share our content, to get our words out there, and so you're as much as big a part of this show as we are. And so again, I say thank you. And on that note, it's time for us to end the stream. We really appreciate you, obviously, and we hope that on behalf of Carrie and I, we hope that you enjoy your Friday and your weekend. And please, if you're not doing anything Monday morning, join us again bright and early. Take care.
We bout that, ayy. We in the zone. We out here, yeah. Spitting the facts, how it's supposed to be. Hair of the dog.